At least from the time of Aristotle, creativity has been considered a gift from the gods for human beings only. But the recent developments in AI are really starting to blur the lines of whether creativity is human only and make us question once again what creativity actually is. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So first of all, I want to state that this is actually a little bit of an hors d'oeuvre for a talk that I'm going to have with Warren Redlich tomorrow afternoon on his channel. So if you're catching this before tomorrow afternoon, before Tuesday afternoon, you should definitely check out his channel and see what we talk about. I'm not going to give that away. But anyway, it is tangentially related to this at least. And if it's a couple of days later, you can catch the link in the description because I'll put it there. Anyway, creativity obviously is a slippery term, and there's a lot of different definitions from different people. You know what they say about opinions. Opinions are the same thing as ideas about creativity. There's an awful lot of ideas about what creativity is. And obviously, as I said in the introduction, from the time of Aristotle, which is 2,500 years ago or so, people have been writing about what creativity is. And I'm sure people thought about that before that. But anyway, at least for the last 2.5 millennia, people have explicitly been wondering what creativity is, how it works, and all of that. And of course, we've now got psychology and we've got MRIs and we've got all sorts of scientific studies that kind of show how the human brain operates. Just to make things easy, I'm going to refer to an article from Yale Insights from actually, I guess, 8 years ago now, from Professor Richard Foster, who's part of the Yale School of Management. And he has a couple of good definitions that I think are worth using as a baseline to talk about creativity. So I'm just going to read 2 paragraphs from this article. Richard Foster, a lecturer in management at Yale School of Management and emeritus director of McKinsey & Company, has made a study of creativity, both its history and the process itself. He differentiates creativity both from innovation and discovery, which are often used as synonyms. Only creativity, he says, is about making something new rather than merely applying or discovering something new. Creative solutions, quote, creative solutions are insightful, they're novel, they're simple, they're elegant, and they're generative, end quote, he says. Quote, when you find one creative idea, more often than not, it triggers other ideas in the same fashion, end quote. A key to being creative, as Foster sees it, is the ability to find associations between different fields of knowledge, especially ones that appear radically different at first. The process is iterative rather than linear and requires people with curiosity, energy, and the openness to see connections where others cannot. Quote, new solutions are often the combination of 2 or more existing concepts. If you have a videotape store and combine it with Amazon and Priority Mail, you get Netflix, end quote, he says. Clearly, this is an old article because that's an old example. Anyway, continuing on, quote, it's all about constructing associative networks of ideas. That's what you're doing when you're creating a business. A business is not one idea, it's many, many ideas. So obviously Richard Foster here is taking a business slant on everything, right? He's interested in creativity as it applies to businesses. But of course, I think even beyond that, what most people think about is creativity in terms of like painting or writing or creating music or things like that, right? Those are the fine arts, the creative arts. But anyway, we do have a few terms that we can play with here. Number one, they're insightful. Creative solutions are insightful. There's something that you're seeing that other people haven't, I guess. They're novel. Novelty is a really big part of creativity. In other words, can you create something brand new that nobody else has done before? They're simple, according to Foster. I'm not positive I agree with that, but I do understand where he's coming from. Simplicity, a lot of times, simplicity seems easier than it is. Like when you look at a beautiful painting, you think of it as a beautiful painting, as something very elegant and simple. You don't realize the years or decades of instruction and work that have gone in, insight and everything, craft, all of that stuff that have gone into creating this work that looks very, very simple. So there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that generate something that looks simple. Next, creativity is elegant. I think that's actually kind of a nice thing. I don't usually hear that talked about for creativity, but elegance is a beautiful thing, right? You don't just want something new. You want something that's beautiful, that you're like, wow, this is an elegant solution to a problem or an elegant way of thinking about the way light interacts with an object or something. And then the last part of his definition is generative. That means it needs to be able to make something. So creativity, you could argue that even an idea is creative, and certainly that is a valid argument, right? There's the standard line that creativity is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. But that 1% inspiration is the critical factor, right? In fact, actually, let's see if I can look right here. It's always hard to do this backwards, but right there. Peter Thiel's From Zero to One, which is a book about businesses and about taking something from nothing to the first step. And once you get it to that first step, the rest is work. But that generative idea, that generative way of thinking about something, combine that with novelty, and that, in my mind, is the essence of creativity, right? So you're taking something that people haven't thought of before exactly, and you're making something from that. And that inspiration is what generates the ability to then go forward and create the actual work itself. And I just want to touch on the beginning of the second paragraph again. A key to being creative, as Foster sees it, is the ability to find associations between different fields of knowledge, especially ones that appear radically different at first. So true creativity in the sciences might involve like taking something between physics and biology, or between chemistry and electrical engineering or something, and putting those together. Creativity in the world of art nowadays especially might be taking radically different materials, like materials designed for construction, the famous things of soup cans being art, or toilet bowls being art, or things, right? Taking things that were not designed for what they are and making us rethink about them. That's the idea of kind of smashing together radically different ideas, radically different fields, and synthesizing those things into a new concept. And then I would say there's also an audience aspect of this. Part of creativity, at least in the fine arts, and especially in the fine arts, you don't just do it for yourself. You don't really write a poem or paint a painting solely for yourself. You do, obviously, partially, but the idea is to share this. And certainly you see this with a theatrical event like a play or a screenplay or something that's designed to be shared with others. So these creative acts actually involve an audience as well. And obviously Foster, again, is talking much more about businesses, but when you think about this in terms of the creativity of a fine artist or a theatrical artist or something, the idea is not just to do this for yourself, it's to do this for others, to share with others. And so audience reaction is actually critical to this too. It's very important that the audience go, you need that aha moment. Schopenhauer and many other people's ideas of being lost in the flow of things, everybody calls it flow these days, right? Especially athletes are talking about flow all the time. So, they talk about flow, but what they're talking about is that sort of being lost in the creative act. Or in the case of athletics, it's the athletic act, but you could consider that creative at a certain bar. So there's lots of different fields where creativity can happen. But what I'm saying is that the audience could be captured by that too. If you've ever been to a museum or something and had the good fortune to see a really amazing work of art, doesn't have to be famous at all, but just, some sort of work of art that you just go like, and you just stare at that work of art for a period of time. That's what Arthur Schopenhauer was talking about, 70 years ago now, 60 years ago, something like that. But, he was talking about that audience thing, that losing yourself in somebody else's work. That also is part of creativity too, at the very, very highest level. It's that sort of genius where, at least in the fine arts, where an audience will get lost in the thought. In terms of businesses, I guess you would consider it, you're going to get more customers, right? You're going to get people who are interested in your product because it's very, very intriguing. The original idea of Netflix, if you are old enough to remember, they used to mail you little envelopes with a DVD in it, right? And that was a very novel idea, but Netflix's idea was always to go to online. They just couldn't do it yet because the technology didn't exist. So you could see that flow. They named themselves Netflix and the internet, and they were doing movies, so they smashed those together. So you can see what their original plan was from the get-go, but that sort of genius insight of combining these different fields and putting them together and, getting to where this technology can go. And don't forget that technology is also crucial to all of creativity. If you think about like song creation or writing in the days of Homer, even then though, you've got the technology of language. So yes, it's not a tool, but you have people who have learned language, and they've learned musical language or structural language, like what we'd use to communicate with each other, and they memorize these things. So that is a technology of some sorts, but certainly once you get to things like playing music or writing things down on paper or painting or architecture or any of those kinds of things. You're talking about technology. So creativity is also based on technology. And actually that example of Netflix is actually a pretty decent example because it shows how you need the technology of the internet, you need the technology of the post office originally, you need the technology of broadband internet in order to go full internet and full streaming. So you need these things, and of course the marketplace and the ability to sell and buy and have subscriptions and all of that. So there's a combination of technologies that are necessary to make something like this happen. So cool, even though it's kind of loosely defined, it's one of those things where I'm sure most of us human beings can go like, I can't quite define it, but I know it when I see it. I know that creativity and I understand what's going on with it, and it's very cool and it's very human. The thing that I really wanted to sort of touch on today is what does AI, and especially these large language models and the outgrowths of them like ChatGPT and Dall-E 2 and stable diffusion and on and on and on. What do these things tell us about creativity, and particularly about the human element of creativity? So I'll start with me. When I was young, I was very, very firmly of the opinion that human beings were very, very special. We were unique. I have gone a long way from that attitude. I think that what we are is we are emergent complexity. We are what you see that comes out of complex enough interactions of neurons, which of course, if you dial it back, is just complex interactions of electrons and protons and things like that. So if you really want to dial it back, it's all physics, because that's everything. Everything is physics, and everything in physics is based on math. So, it's all physics and math at the heart. But basically what I'm talking about here is that if you build something complex enough, you will get emergent behavior like creativity that will come out of it. And what we're starting to see here is the complexity is getting to the point where we're actually beginning to see that take place in AI. Now, you can also talk about complexity in the animal kingdom as well. So if we want to remove computing technology out of the equation for a moment, think about animals. There are many animals that know how to use tools, not just monkeys, but birds and other creatures have understood how to create and utilize tools to do things. That's a creative act, and it is passed down. It's not something that they have genetically inside them. They have to pass it down so that the other, animals in their family or in their group are able to understand that. So there is at least some level of creativity. And certainly if you have a dog or a cat, I'm sure you've seen some relatively creative behavior on their part to escape from a fence or to get food or things like that, right? So you can see some level of creativity. Instead of some binary, animals don't have creativity, humans do have creativity. I think we're looking, as with everything else, just like consciousness and all of that, we're looking at kind of a sliding scale of that. So there's more levels of creativity. And once you introduce the idea of sliding levels of creativity and the idea that creativity very well might be just an emergent property of really, really complex interactions of neurons, then you can start to separate that out from human beings. It doesn't have to be a gift from the gods anymore, as Aristotle thought. It can just become an emergent behavior that is likely to occur when you give something enough complexity and give it enough knowledge. And when we talk about these large language models, we're talking about hundreds of billions of parameters. OpenAI's GPT-3 is around 174 billion parameters, and GPT-4 is supposedly coming out relatively soon, within the next couple of months. And I think that's going to be on the order of 1.5 trillion parameters, so another factor of 10 bigger than what we're seeing right now. And of course, the way that these language models are trained is they essentially eat the internet. They just suck in everything they can from the internet. Pictures, language, audio recordings, on and on and on. You name it, if it's on the internet, they can scrape it and they can utilize that data. Now, I'm making this all sound very, very simple. It's incredibly complicated to do this. It takes a huge number of human hours to be able to make this all happen. But once you do that, once you have that capability, you are able to then have a person, a thing that's incredibly knowledgeable and is getting more and more complex in terms of the number of, brain connections, that neuronic connections or artificial neuronic connections that are between all of these things. And so when you combine these two things, number one, something like ChatGPT is actually smarter than any of us humans in the sense that it has access to everything on the internet. So for human beings, in order for us to know everything, we have to look it up. This is able to take it in and kind of essentially suck it in and memorize it all and absorb it all into itself. itself. So it actually has better memory than human beings do. The question is, how complex does it need to be to reach the order of creativity that a human does? And what we're seeing right now with things like ChatGPT and Dall-E 2 and many, many other examples of this is we're seeing things that are getting to the level of creativity where we're going like, yeah, kind of human. It makes dumb mistakes, but also sometimes it's really pretty genius. And it's like, wow, that's a pretty creative output. But of course, the next level, just the next generation that could be coming out within weeks or months, might jump to the level of best human, right? If we talk about another factor of 10 improvement, this thing might be really, really good. And I'm not predicting we're going to see that immediately, right? These language models are kind of like, they're unconstrained. They're trained on a giant corpus of data, but they're unconstrained. But it's when you start putting out specific uses of these language models, that's when you start to really see the genius of it. So I'm not saying when ChatGPT 4 comes out, you're immediately going to go like, this is more creative and smart than a human being, any human being on the planet. But what could happen is that 3 to 6 months from then, when you get Dall-E 3 or when you get some other thing, ChatGPT 2 or whatever it is, when you start getting to these next generation things that utilize this language model, that's where you really might start to go like, wow, this is actually better than any human being. And let's go back to Richard Foster's discussion just a second here and talk about it specifically with regard to AI. So number one, the ability to find associations between different fields of knowledge, especially ones that appear radically different at first. That's something that a large language model just kind of automatically has because it has access to everything. So it's able to synthesize much more easily than most human beings. I mean, that's kind of one of the things that separates really genius human beings from the average human being, is that sort of synthetic ability to put together radically different ideas and to create new concepts from that. And that's something that by default, something like ChatGPT or GPT-3 or GPT-4 or any of the competing products, this is not an advertisement for OpenAI. I'm just thinking about it off the top of my head. But anyway, any of these products, what it has access to is all of these ideas at once. Now, whether it can utilize that and put them together or not, that's a whole different question. But it has the capability to synthesize many, many different ideas from many different fields. And then let's turn to this sentence. Creative solutions are number 1, insightful, number 2, novel, number 3, simple, number 4, elegant, and number 5, generative. So insightful is a slippery term. That's a hard thing to talk about. That's like, I guess that's something where you're creating something that has a purpose that's important or something like that. That's a little difficult to nail down with something like ChatGPT. That it's like, right, you've asked it, you've prompted it to do something, and so it's going to do it. So I'm not positive that at this point ChatGPT might be considered to be insightful because it's mostly the human that's driving it. Number 2, novelty, right? They're novel. So this is an interesting area, hint, hint, that I'm going to talk about with Warren Redlich tomorrow. What is novelty, and is something like ChatGPT or Dall-E 2 or whatever, is that novel, or is that just regurgitating what everybody else has done? And that is a topic for another day. But I think that is a really, really valuable question to ask. Whether this is novel or not is going to really be an important question that's going to be asked in a lot of circles over the next few years. So I'm going to table that. We're going to talk about that. So that's just my tease to say tune in tomorrow on Warren's channel. They're simple. That's an interesting thing. Is this solution simple? Is it I guess simple and elegant. I'll put those together. Is it simple and elegant? Does it create something that looks good? I would say the answer to that right now is yes, at least with some prompting. I mean, if you ask it to create some programmatic stuff, right? Say, give me some Python code to do something like that. And then you say, can you simplify this? Often it will do that and it will shrink down the amount of code. Or I've done things where I've asked it to reduce the amount of language that it uses. By default, ChatGPT is a little bit verbose. It kind of talks a lot. And so what I've done is sometimes I've said this is great, but can you make it shorter, or can you be more concise or something? And it can shrink it down. So it has the capability to do things that are elegant and simple, certainly. Might not be directly out of the can, but it can definitely do that with a little prompting. And finally, is something like Dall-E 2 or ChatGPT generative? Absolutely. I mean, it is making stuff, right? You can question whether it's novel, but it's definitely making things. It's either writing something or painting a picture or, painting a photograph or whatever. So it's definitely generating things. So I think that we've gotten to the point where we definitely have generative levels of creativity. The bigger question in my mind is novelty and I guess elegance and simplicity and to some extent insightfulness. I mean, I think that's important personally, but I don't think it's as important as the novelty aspect and the elegance aspect. Those are the important things. And I think those are the big questions that are still up in the air at this point. I don't think they're perfect at this point, but what's terrifying is what's going to come next. What could be here in the January of 2024? If I revisit this topic in January of 2024, am I going to say like, oh crap, human beings thought we were special in terms of creativity, but we actually are realizing that we're not at all creative. The computer is way more creative than we are now that it has enough complexity. So all in all, I think what we have to do as human beings is become much more humble, at least in terms of creativity. I think we've always kind of thought of ourselves as that was our special thing, right? It's like other animals have bigger teeth or they're stronger or something, but humans are creative. And I think that we are going to have to be very humble about that. And we're going to have to realize that we are not going to be unique in creativity anymore. We're already seeing the first steps in that. And we're going to see a lot more of that over the next year or 2 years or 5 years or something along those lines. So we're going to need some level of humbleness. But then on top of that, I think there's a fascinating thing that we as scientists and people who have curiosity can look at this and say, how does creativity happen? Because that's always been so mysterious in human beings. What is creativity? How does it happen? All of that. We can actually examine this more closely with AI. At least we have another data point, right? If we only really have human beings that are creative, at least on a grand scale, and then we get another data point, which is an artificial intelligence, which is creative on a grand scale, that gives us some really interesting things that we can compare back and forth. So we may learn a whole lot more about what creativity is and why it's important to us and how it operates. And finally, there's the novelty aspect of creativity. That's something that's really, really, given a lot of status in terms of creativity, especially in the fine arts. But in some ways, I think that is also overblown because nothing comes out of a vacuum. We're not all Boltzmann brains floating around in an empty universe thinking of things out of the vacuum. We're all dependent on a whole bunch of other things that are going on, not just the technology, right? You can't paint a painting until you have paint and a paintbrush. So, you've got to have and a canvas too. So you've got to have things, you've got to have technology in order to create these creative works. And so all of that stuff means that we are dependent on a lot of other aspects in order to create things. So I think that novelty is a really interesting and slippery term. And that's something that is also open to debate whether these are novel or not. But that is something that we may see more and more what we would call novelty over the next generations of these things. So again, remember, we're kind of at version like not even 1.0, kind of like 0.5 or something of these things. So we're just barely scraping the surface. And over the next few years, I think that we are going to realize that these can not only match humans in creativity, but actually exceed us in a lot of cases. All right, I hope you found this speculative episode fun and insightful and thought-provoking. If you did, please do like it so other people can find it. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you all so much for a wonderful 2022, and here's to a great 2023. And if you want to join the team, just check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, Success is a Possible Outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on and on. So check it out. And for those of you interested in investing, check out WeBull, an amazing platform for buying and selling stocks, and now cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and others. Open an account and get a free stock valued at up to $200, and fund your account and get another free stock valued at up to $1,600. Check out the link in the description and help the channel at the same time. Thank you. And finally, don't forget that we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.